Her name was Maggie Kuhn, and at 57, she was not planning to start a revolution. She was planning to continue her work, to wake up each morning with purpose, and to believe that experience still mattered. She had spent decades serving people, mentoring young workers, building systems, helping organizations grow. Her mind was sharp, her energy strong, and her belief in fairness unshaken. Yet something invisible had begun to close around her. Not illness, not failure, not weakness. Age. At 57, she noticed the meetings felt different. Younger faces filled the room. Her ideas were politely acknowledged, then quietly ignored. Decisions were made after meetings she was no longer invited to. Her workload slowly thinned, not because she asked for rest, but because they assumed she needed it. She heard words that sounded kind, but carried dismissal. "You have done enough. You deserve to slow down. Let the younger generation lead now." But she was not tired, she was not done, and she was not invisible. At first, she questioned herself. Maybe this is how it is. Maybe this is normal. Maybe fighting it would make her look bitter. But then she looked around. She saw colleagues her age quietly removed. Talented people forced into early retirement. Brilliant minds erased by a number. She felt something rise inside her. Not anger, but clarity. If this is happening to me, it is happening to thousands. If I stay silent, I become part of the problem. That was the moment everything changed. She began to write, not complaints, but truths. She wrote about lost skills, about dignity, about the cost of wasting experience. She spoke to friends who had been pushed out, listened to stories of fear and shame, people who still needed income, people who still loved their work, people who felt discarded. Every story added weight to her resolve. At 57, while society expected her to fade quietly, she began to step forward. She attended meetings she was not invited to. She asked uncomfortable questions. Why is age treated like a flaw? Why is wisdom replaced with youth alone? Why is loyalty rewarded with dismissal? Some smiled politely, some avoided her, some warned her. "You are risking your reputation." She answered calmly, "I am defending it." Soon, word spread. There is a woman speaking up. There is someone refusing to disappear. Letters arrived. Calls followed. Strangers sharing the same pain. Different offices, same injustice. She realized something powerful. This was not an individual problem. This was a system. And systems only change when challenged. She was not a politician. She was not wealthy. She had no organization behind her. What she had was conviction. She started gathering people, older workers, younger allies, anyone who believed fairness had no expiration date. They met in small rooms, living rooms, church basements, public halls. No fancy banners, no sponsors, just voices. They shared experiences, they documented discrimination, they learned the laws, they found the gaps where injustice hid. She taught them to speak without apology, to stand tall, to refuse shame. Age is not a weakness. Age is a record of survival. Her words resonated, especially with those who had been told to step aside. At 57, she worked longer hours than ever, not for a paycheck, but for principle. She faced resistance, mockery, dismissal. They called her unrealistic, outdated, emotional. She wore those labels like armor, because behind every insult was fear. Fear that she was right. She did not ask for special treatment. She demanded equal respect. Her movement did not start with headlines. It started with courage. One conversation, one meeting, one refusal to accept silence. And slowly, very slowly, the ground began to shift. People listened. Media noticed. Questions reached boardrooms. Who decides when someone is too old? What does experience cost? What does discrimination steal? At 57, she had not planned to lead, but leadership chose her. Because when injustice meets courage, age becomes irrelevant. This was only the beginning. Part 2 will show how her voice turned into a national movement and how resistance grew stronger as she refused to back down. By the time she reached her late 50s, the woman at the center of the growing storm was no longer just a concerned worker. She had become a symbol. Her name was Maggie Kuhn, and everywhere she went, people recognized something rare, a person who had been pushed aside and decided to push back. The meetings grew larger. What once fit inside living rooms now filled community halls. Older workers sat beside young professionals. Students listened next to retirees. What connected them was not age, but anger mixed with hope. She stood before them without notes, without scripts, speaking from lived truth. She told them that discrimination does not begin with cruelty. It begins with assumptions. That older workers are slow, that they resist change, that their value has an expiration date. She dismantled those lies one by one. She reminded them that experience is not outdated, it is tested, that wisdom does not block progress, it guides it. Her words traveled beyond the walls. Local newspapers printed short stories. Radio hosts invited her for interviews. Her message reached people who thought they were alone. With every story shared, the movement gained strength. But so did the resistance. Organizations began to notice her name. Employers felt challenged. Policies once unquestioned were suddenly under scrutiny. Some attempted to silence her with courtesy, invitations withdrawn politely, emails unanswered, doors closed gently but firmly. Others were more direct. She received warnings, anonymous letters, phone calls suggesting she should stop before she embarrassed herself. They said she was damaging her legacy, that she should enjoy retirement, that fighting systems was a young person's game. She listened, then continued, because she knew something they did not. Injustice does not retire. She began to study labor laws, digging into policy language, finding contradictions and loopholes. She discovered how age discrimination was hidden behind neutral words, restructuring, efficiency, fresh perspectives. She taught others how to recognize these tactics, how to document them, how to speak without fear. Workshops formed, training sessions followed. People learned how to protect themselves. For the first time, many older workers felt power returning. The movement found a name, not one chosen for softness, but for strength. It represented defiance, visibility, refusal. Young activists joined, drawn by her clarity and courage. They saw in her a future version of themselves and realized this fight protected everyone. She insisted on intergenerational unity. Age against age only benefits discrimination. Solidarity dismantles it. She spoke at universities, at union meetings, at churches, at public forums. Everywhere she repeated the same truth. A society that discards its elders will eventually discard its youth. The pressure increased. Critics accused her of exaggeration, of stirring conflict, of clinging to relevance. She answered calmly, "I am not clinging, I am standing." The emotional toll was heavy. Long nights, endless travel, limited resources. There were moments of exhaustion, moments of doubt. But then she would receive another letter, another call, another voice saying, "Because of you, I spoke up." Because of you, I was heard. Because of you, I stayed. Those words became fuel. By now, policymakers were paying attention. Committees requested testimony, lawmakers asked questions. Age discrimination entered official conversations. What once felt invisible now demanded response. She walked into formal rooms filled with suits and skepticism. She carried no intimidation, only facts, stories, moral clarity. She challenged them respectfully, but firmly, asking why competence was measured by youth, why experience was treated as liability, why loyalty was punished. Some smiled politely, some avoided her, some warned her. You are risking your reputation. She answered calmly, I am defending. By the time the movement reached national awareness, the resistance hardened. Quiet dismissal turned into open opposition. The woman at the center of it all, Maggie Kuhn, felt the shift immediately. Invitations were canceled without explanation. Funding promises vanished. Supporters were pressured by employers to step away. What once felt like growth now felt like a test. Power does not surrender easily. Organizations that once smiled politely now labeled her a troublemaker. Executives framed her work as disruptive. They claimed she was dividing generations. They accused her of slowing progress. She knew this language well. It was the same language used to silence anyone who challenged comfort. The pressure reached her allies. Some lost promotions, some were reassigned, others were warned that public involvement could cost them their jobs. Fear crept into meetings. Voices lowered. Attendance dropped. For the first time, she wondered, have I asked too much of them? She did not blame anyone who stepped back. Courage looks different when livelihoods are at stake. But she also knew retreat would confirm every stereotype, that older voices can be pushed aside, that resistance fades with time. She chose to stand firmer. She organized public forums instead of private meetings. She invited media instead of whispering behind doors. She brought discrimination into the open. Stories poured out. Workers forced out months before pensions matured. Employees replaced by younger hires at lower wages. Years of service erased without gratitude. These were not isolated cases. They were patterns. She documented everything: names, dates, policies, outcomes. Facts became shields. Opponents attempted to discredit her personally. They questioned her motives. They mocked her age. They suggested she was bitter about her own career. She responded with grace. Never defensive, never angry. She simply returned to the evidence. Every attack strengthened her credibility, because truth does not need volume, it needs consistency. A critical moment arrived when a major organization publicly denied age discrimination claims. They dismissed dozens of testimonies as misunderstandings. The movement was challenged openly: either retreat or confront. She chose confrontation. She organized a national gathering. Workers from across the country traveled at their own expense. Some took vacation days, some risked termination. The room overflowed. When she stepped forward to speak, the room fell silent. Not because she demanded attention, but because she had earned it. She did not shout, she did not accuse, she told the truth calmly. That age discrimination is theft. It steals dignity, income, purpose, and trust. That workplaces lose innovation when they discard experience. That progress requires memory as much as vision. Her words carried weight because they were lived. Media coverage exploded. Headlines questioned corporate practices. Public debate ignited. For the first time, organizations were forced to respond publicly. Some denied, some deflected, some quietly changed policies without acknowledgement. But change had begun. The backlash intensified. Legal threats surfaced. Attempts were made to limit her speaking engagements. She felt the strain physically. Long travel, little rest. There were nights when exhaustion pressed heavily, moments when solitude felt overwhelming. But then she remembered the faces in that crowded room, the courage it took for them to show up. She reminded herself, leadership is not comfort, it is responsibility. She was no longer fighting to be heard, she was fighting to protect the space she had opened, and she refused to close it. Part 4 will reveal how her persistence reshaped laws and workplaces, and how a movement born from dismissal began to transform systems. The movement had crossed a line that could never be erased. What began as dismissed voices had become a national force, and at its center stood Maggie Kuhn, steady, unyielding, and clear. Institutions now realized silence was no longer possible. Questions were being asked publicly. Employees were documenting patterns. Journalists were following trails. What had once been hidden behind policy language was now visible. Committees formed. Hearings were scheduled. Panels requested testimony. She entered rooms once closed to people like her, rooms filled with decision-makers who had never imagined being challenged by someone her age. She did not enter with anger, she entered with preparation. She presented data, stories, trends. She showed how forced retirement weakened institutions, how replacing experience with cheap labor increased mistakes, how loyalty, when punished, destroyed morale. Her calm dismantled defensiveness. Her clarity made denial difficult. Some officials resisted. They argued economics, they claimed flexibility, they warned of complexity. She answered simply, fairness is not complex. Discrimination is. Behind the scenes, workplaces began changing quietly. Mandatory retirement policies softened. Training programs included older workers. Performance reviews shifted focus from age to ability. Not because companies wanted praise, but because they wanted protection. The movement had created accountability. Workshops expanded into programs, support networks formed across states. People shared strategies, legal language, and courage. Older workers who once felt isolated now felt connected. Young professionals joined, not as helpers, but as partners. They understood that protecting older workers protected their future. She insisted on this unity. Every speech repeated the same message. This is not about age, this is about justice. As momentum grew, so did expectations. People looked to her for answers, for direction, for reassurance. The weight was heavy. She was tired in ways sleep could not fix. Her body reminded her of long roads and long fights. But she did not slow down. She learned to delegate, to trust, to step back without stepping aside. Leadership evolved. The movement no longer depended on one voice, it had many. Policies changed. Language shifted. The term age discrimination entered mainstream discussion. What once felt radical now sounded reasonable. She watched organizations adopt principles she once had to defend. She listened as leaders repeated her words without credit. She did not mind. Change mattered more than recognition. There were setbacks, laws moved slowly, progress was uneven, but direction was clear. The wall had cracked. She stood one evening after a long day, alone in a quiet hall. Chairs stacked, lights dim. She allowed herself a moment, not of victory, but of gratitude. For every person who spoke, for every risk taken, for every silence broken. She knew the fight was not finished, but it was no longer fragile. Part 5 will bring the ending, showing how her courage at 57 reshaped the future and what legacy she left behind. By the time she reached her early 60s, the movement she started at 57 had become unstoppable. Maggie Kuhn had transformed from a single voice into a network of thousands. Older workers who once feared dismissal now stood together. Young professionals understood the value of experience, and workplaces had begun to change. Her mornings still began early. She reviewed letters, planned workshops, prepared speeches. But now, the letters carried hope, not only frustration. Stories of workers kept in positions they loved, of mentors recognized for decades of service, of policies rewritten to protect everyone. She traveled across states, speaking at universities, conferences, town halls. She shared strategies. She encouraged collaboration. She reminded people that age discrimination is not only an individual problem, but a societal one. Her energy inspired a new generation. Activists emerged across industries. Politicians began addressing age bias in legislation. Media highlighted stories of older workers thriving. Yet, she remained humble. Her focus was never fame or recognition. It was fairness, dignity, justice. She believed that courage was contagious, that one person refusing to accept invisibility could ignite change in thousands. In her speeches, she emphasized unity, older and younger workers together, experience combined with innovation, mentorship replacing replacement. She reflected on the journey, the resistance, the backlash, the exhaustion. She realized that each obstacle had strengthened her movement. Each attempt to silence her had amplified her message. Each dismissal had proven the need for persistence. People often asked how she maintained her strength. She answered simply, "I refused to disappear." Her philosophy spread. Organizations implemented programs for age diversity. Mandatory retirement faded. Career transitions became supportive, not punitive. Workplaces learned that wisdom matters as much as energy. Her life became a testament that age is not a barrier, that late beginnings can have monumental impact, that one person's refusal to stay silent can ripple through a nation. By 70, she had seen results. But more importantly, she had inspired a culture shift. People who would have remained invisible now had a voice, and the definition of contribution had expanded beyond age. She continued to mentor, to speak, to challenge policies, to insist that no one be pushed aside because of a number. Her legacy was not only in law or policy, it was in courage, in connection, in the countless people who found strength to act because she acted first. Her story became a blueprint, a reminder that justice does not wait for permission, that experience is power, that persistence can move mountains. At 57, she had started a movement because she refused to be silenced. At 70, she had changed a nation, and the world had learned that age does not define worth. Her life proved that courage has no expiration date, and that one voice rising above dismissal can become the chorus that reshapes history.